Hey Stel, welcome to the Me and My Health Up podcast show. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Anthony. Thank you so much for having me here today.
You're very welcome to come on the show, and particularly your area of expertise is in high demand. We've seen through the pandemic that there's been a rise in binge eating or emotional eating, whatever you want to call it, but there's certainly been an increase, and as a result, there's that term, or that people say, I've gained COVID kilos, and it's most likely due to a bit of that binge or emotional eating in a combination with probably less movement, but really keen to tackle this subject that you're an expert on.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm excited to share.
And before we get started, I really want to understand, and I'm sure the listeners are really keen to hear your backstory of how you have arrived at what you're doing today.
Yeah, okay. So it's a long story, so I'll try and keep it short because we could be here all day. But I had a disordered relationship with food and my body for what I could count 13 years, but if I'm really honest with myself, my relationship, especially with my body image, dates back to when I was 12 years old. So probably over 25, 28 years of just endless struggles with my body, then, trying to kind of make myself smaller. I was on constant, what I call the binge guilt cycle, where I would be in stages where I would overindulge, overeat, and then go into guilt and shame, loathing, get back on a restrictive diet, and repeat the process over and over again. So, yeah, I think 2007, I realized I had a really unhealthy relationship with food. I was not eating at all during the day, and that led to me pretty much binge eating at night. At first, I couldn't understand it. So I was living off coffee and cigarettes during the day, working long hours in a really highly stressful environment. And it just... I just couldn't understand why I'd get home and, for example, eat a whole chicken and feel like I still could eat another one. And so I started on a health journey. I started doing the eat less, run more. I started eating more frequently though during the day. That seemed to help. However, the binge eating episodes, they still crept up, and I couldn't understand why that was. And I just kind of thought, well, I just needed to sort out my food issues. I thought binge eating was more as a result of my cravings. And if I sort out my cravings, i.e. get rid of the things that causes cravings, like, the sugars and the carbs and all that stuff, then I would stop binge eating. However, what I didn't realize is that taking away something that you are using as a crutch, unfortunately, can backfire when you actually have a little bit of sugar again. It just sets you off on like a downward spiral. So I started actually running ultra marathons to try and make up for my eating. I enjoyed road running, don't get me wrong, it was a lot of fun. However, the reason why most of the times I'd get out on the road to run was to make up for a binge. So this cycle continued for 13 years. I got stricter and stricter with my day-to-day eating. However, as I mentioned, the binge eating was still there. So on weekends or, even during the week, I found myself driving to a service station, buying binge foods, hiding and eating it in traffic, and then hiding the packaging and things like that. So there was a lot of secrecy and a lot of hiding and shame around that relationship. And this actually developed into binge eating disorder eventually, and also a disorder called orthorexia. So as I started looking into more health and well-being. I wanted to actually help others be and feel healthy. And my idea was that I needed to be 100% healthy all the time, be a great example for my clients. And I took that to the extreme, where I couldn't go to the restaurant because I didn't trust their cooking methods or their oils or the ingredients they would put in there. Everything had to be low tox, calorie free, sugar free, and so it just became this whole obsession with eating healthy foods instead of having a balanced relationship with food. So that was my struggle for over 13 years, and eventually, I remember one night I had another binge episode. My husband was away, and I just burst into tears. I sat on the floor crying. I was holding my dog, and I just said, I can't carry on like this. Enough is enough. And that was the day where I reached out for help, and I found someone who actually understood what I was going through. She was an eating disorder coach, and she was able to help me through my journey. And that's kind of how my experience with binge eating. And as I recovered, I like to speak of the word recovery. As I recovered from my disorder, I realized that I can actually help others in the same area. And that's when I started actually branching out and helping mostly women have a better relationship with food and their bodies. So that's the journey.
Wow, what a remarkable journey it's been for you, Stel, and thanks for sharing, because I know it probably isn't easy retelling the story because, there's a whole lot of growth and development in that journey you've been on, and a bit of a roller coaster from what I, can hear, and certainly lots of ups and downs. And I'm glad that, you found the right level of support. And what's really amazing is that you now are out helping other women to avoid this up and down and this emotional roller coaster that you went on. So well done for seeking the right help and then being able to then pass that on to others.
Yeah.
Is there, with your work with women, with similar challenges to what you face, do you find there's any commonality or, any backbone to where this stems from? This, I guess this cycling around this not a great relationship with food, self-sabotaging, and then trying to find ways around it. And as you said, like it got you into ultra marathon running, and and that's not uncommon that people get addicted to exercise to overcome their eating or disordered eating. So, do you find any commonalities or any drivers behind this?
Yes, absolutely. So, first off, binge eating is mostly an automatic thing through most of my clients' experiences and my own, where it's almost... most of my clients feel like it's almost an out-of-body experience. They can see themselves going through the motion, but they don't really want to do it. Other clients have said they feel possessed, or there's a little devil sitting on their shoulders. So each one has a different experience. I've actually named this the food zombie mode, where we actually get into like a zombie, tearing into like food without any remorse, right? And and this is all actually caused by the survival part of our brain, the hypothalamus. And the reason why this comes through is because of three main categories that I see in my work, and which I also support my clients on. And the first one is actually hunger, And this might actually not be physical hunger. It might also just be almost a sense of a deprivation mindset when it comes to food. So we see a lot of women who's had a history of dieting, constantly on diets, most of their lives. It creates that deprivation mindset. Also, a lot of people in our day-to-day now, we don't have time, and we don't have time to eat either. So you might not be on a diet, but you might not have time for food and eating. And unfortunately, when you do eat, your body's in survival mode. So it just kind of tries to get in as much as possible in case there's starvation. And the reason for this, hunger piece is the fact that if we either restrict our foods and our eating and our calories too much, whether we forget to eat or whether we do it on purpose through extreme fasting or extreme unhealthy ways, extreme exercise, unfortunately, our brains are meant and it's built to survive. So it will go on autopilot when there is food available, and it will usually go for the high calorie foods, which we normally term binge foods, which is your carbohydrates, your sugary foods, and your high fatty foods, because the body and the brain knows that those foods are going to give you energy now if you need to run away from danger or whatever the case is. But the body is also optimistic. It says, well, I need to store some for later, just in case this starvation happens again, right? So hunger plays a massive part. And like when I work with my clients, that's the first thing we look at. We look at their relationship with food. Even if you're just fearful of certain foods, like a lot of people have developed a fear for chocolate, for example, because they've heard that chocolate's bad for them. But it gets to a point where there's so much anxiety around it that when they eat it, it's like, well, I might as well get it all in because I'm never allowed to have this ever again. So, so the physical reasons is quite a large one. And a lot of my clients, once we sort out their relationship with food, the binge eating actually dwindles down to almost nothing. The second thing is emotions. So we are all emotional beings, and we all emotionally eat. I just wanted to put that out there because I feel like today's culture has kind of villainized emotional eating as well, right? So emotional eating, is textbook definition is when you eat when you're not hungry. But that means we all do it, right? Because there's birthday celebrations when we eat cake. We're not hungry when we eat the cake, right? We're at a funeral, there's always snacks. We're brought up in, doesn't matter what culture we're in, the cultures have all been brought up around food. We celebrate, we mourn, we soothe. So in my mind, there's nothing wrong with emotional eating. It becomes a problem when we add guilt and shame to the emotional eating, and also when we add highly restrictive or highly dangerous methods of making up for emotional eating, like extreme dieting. A lot of my clients struggle with bulimia and anorexia, exercise, making up for exercise, using diet pills or whatever the case is. All those things obviously aggravate emotional eating because it doesn't get to the root of the problem. So again, emotions can be quite triggering when it comes to binge eating, especially like the extreme emotions. And then the last one is is habit, really. And the habits form from the previous two scenarios. So either you were emotionally eating in the past, or you come from a very restrictive background and you've let your body starve itself, and that's why it tries to rectify and get enough energy. And eventually you build a habit around that. So that's why we often see that you might binge eat over the weekends, or you might binge eat when you're alone, because eventually it's not the loneliness that triggers the binge anymore. It's more now just the, oh, well, you're alone at home. There might not be, you might feel neutral about it, but your body's recognized and it's formed a neural pathway around, well, no one's at home, I'm going to eat. So, yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
It totally, 100%, Stel, because I'm just thinking of that example where you're at the cinema and you think, well, that's coupled with popcorn and soft drink. You know, I have to have the pop or the choc top ice cream, right? So the cinema, it's that coupling effect, and like you touched on that not so great coupling effect when associated around emotional eating. So emotional eating's, you know, from your point of view, is okay, provided you don't attach guilt and shame to it, and that's when it becomes dangerous. So, you know, I really, and the other one that, you know, comes up for emotional eating for me is, you know, well, certainly when I was brought up, it was, you know, if you fell over or if you got injured or if you're upset, it was always, here's an ice cream or here's a bag of lollies. And you're talking about association. So therefore, every time as an adult, if I have that strong neuro pathway linkage, is that every time I feel upset, then I go for a bag of lollies or automatically because it's hardwired in, or I go for an ice cream. And you know, part of that is attributed to our upbringing or the way we're brought up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, you know, it's just adding, and this was my mistake, you know, like just going on a eating plan or an exercise plan is, you know, it has its benefits, but unfortunately, if you do struggle with, you know, eating issues, you know, we need to go deeper and understand why it's there. And the exercise and the, you know, healthy eating plan, no matter how well-mannered or well-meaning it is from whoever gives it to you, it's only going to create like a little plaster effect, you know. Healing a surface wound, unfortunately, those deep ingrained neural pathways and habits will eventually win.
So, and that's my next question, is how do you help your clients break these strong hardwired connections with past experiences? So whether it be a bad relationship with food, because the food, as you mentioned earlier, is labeled, such as, you know, chocolate is bad for you. Okay, so I have that label, and therefore I've got to eat it secretly. And when I have it secretly, I'm going to eat heaps of it. So because there's going to be a long period before I have it again, and so it's that scarcity mentality, right? Yes. But there is an abundance of chocolate around us, of course. So I'm just thinking, how do you work with your clients that have this hardwired neuro pathways to then automatically switch to those old ways of dealing with things?
Yeah. So I think the very first thing I do with my clients is we create a sense of safety with food, in healing the relationship with food. And what that means is I feel safe around all food, so I don't have fears of the chocolates. I have permission to eat the chocolate if I choose to eat the chocolates. So that helps, but we also look at how food affects them physically and emotionally. So I have a food and mood journal that I get them to complete so that they can actually start tracking certain things. And some of the things we really look for is their hunger. You know, did that previous meal actually serve them, or did they get hungry really quickly? Or, you know, it might be that they're not eating frequently enough. Another rule we have in society is you need to eat at these particular times, you know. Whereas if you look at children, they come to you at the weirdest times and they tell you, I'm hungry. And once they're full, they're like, no, I don't want to eat anything else. So their bodies are really in tune with when to eat. And, you know, unfortunately, we can't always adhere to what our bodies say, but if we start listening to our bodies more often, feed it more regularly, those fears slowly start to move away. And that's when the need for that habit is not really needed anymore, right? And the belief that there's abundance of food starts to come in. And because you have the permission, you have the freedom to eat, like most, I allow my clients to, explore eating all foods, and we see how it affects them instead of saying, well, don't eat that, don't eat this. So going from a more intuitive perspective, and that is really, really helpful, And then obviously the emotional patterns, some of them are really deep ingrained. Like, so for example, my pattern was loneliness and, eating at home alone. I had to work, deeply with being okay with sitting with aloneness and being by myself. And now I actually enjoy those feelings, but there was like a fear and as I call it, a wound attached to that in my childhood that I needed to, I just became aware of it, and then I was able to move past it. So usually what we do is we actually, I'm not a therapist, but it's good for us to reflect on why that behavior is there, because whatever has happened in the past, that creates a belief, and we are driven. Our thoughts of our emotions and our actions are driven by the beliefs we have built about that situation. So I go back with my clients and we look at the first time they might have used food, for example, and in that case we look, well, why was it there? What is the belief that built up there? And we then see if that belief is still serving them. And if we can break that belief from the root, then there's that sense of freedom and moving to the other side.
And I could imagine that belief system that you've talked about is also true around the way people perceive their body. So if they were growing up younger and, some kids just, being kids said that they were fat,
yeah.
And then they started hearing that a couple of times, and it probably wasn't true, but that's what they've been told. And then they start to think, well, maybe, I'm fat. Okay, I'm fat. And so then they see themselves as a fat person, and that is a belief that's not necessarily true, but they carry that with them, and that could then result in them going through these cycles of dieting and as you mentioned, getting into these periods of then feeling guilt and shame and then going through the cycle again. Is that what you find with some of your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So very often behavior is driven by body beliefs. I actually had one of my clients who undergone bariatric surgery in the past, but she came to me, she's like, I'm still emotionally eating, I still feel like I'm out of control with food. Yes, I can't eat as much, but like it's still just there. And we looked at that relationship because she often even mentioned in her commented about her size and her body, and she had kind of labeled herself as a fat pig throughout her sessions. And the one day we unpacked that, and what we realized is it wasn't even someone saying that to her. She, as a 3-year-old, saw her mom looking in the mirror and saying that about herself. So she took on her mom's belief of I'm a fat pig, and that is what she kind of lived through up until the age of like in her 50s. So crazy, isn't it, how we build up those beliefs? And it's so easy. Look at what we see in social media, what we see. I was born in the 80s. I'm giving away my age, but we didn't have social media, and I still had that body dysmorphia belief. And the reason was I grew up with walking past the grocery till, and at eye height for children, there's the magazines, the mummy magazines with, or, you know, these People magazines, all those kind of things with, there's usually a weight loss success story on there, and the caption would read, "I now fit into my bikini, I am happy." So literally for me, I associated weight loss with happiness. And even when I lost the weight, I wasn't happy at that point because for a little while I was, but then I chased more weight loss, and I couldn't understand why I was never happy, even though I really shrunk my body into really dangerously tiny sizes. But I couldn't figure out, well, like, I'm now here, I'm at my goal, why do I want to be smaller? And it's, the belief is not, you know, you need to be this size pants. The belief is, in order for me to be happy, I need to lose weight. So, yeah, crazy how our mind works and those belief systems form.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so sad hearing that story of that little girl that was 3-year-old and, you know, seeing a mother call herself a fat pig and then carrying that for the rest of her life into her 50s. It's really, and that's probably, you know, it's not an uncommon scenario. Like we take on a lot in those first 7 years, and we believe everything that comes into our world in those first 7 years, and as real and factual, and so a lot of damage can be done in those first 7 years, and like that's what you encountered with seeing those magazines with, you know, and associating happiness with losing weight. It's so sad.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is. And so, Stel, I'm really keen to hear your top tips for helping someone to quit binging.
Okay, yes, okay. So it's based on my 3 principles. So the first one is, you know, let go of the extreme dieting, you know, follow an eating plan where you not putting your body in a situation where it feels it's in scarcity mode. That's going to help you a lot. So making sure that you eat more frequently, listen to your body also, you know. We also have the belief that a lot of us have been brought up on the empty plate rule, which means we kind of force feed ourselves more than we should eat because we grew up with, we can't leave the table until the plate was empty. So it's, you know, starting to listen to that part of the body as well. So listen to when you're hungry, but also honor when you've had enough. Like, and most of my clients, we have to retrain that part of the body because that was always ingrained. No, you finish what's there. So starting to listen to your body, eat frequently, and make sure that you have ways to deal with your emotions. You know, I think that's a really hard one. I always have the saying, we were taught how to deal with life economically, but we were never taught how to deal with it emotionally, or the emotions that come with the, you know, the practicality of life. And I mean, emotional coping should be something that they teach at schools, and hopefully that is where they're going. But, you know, we need to be okay with having emotions. We are emotional beings, and every thought we have triggers an emotion, whether we realize it or not. It's just realizing that, yes, okay, there's an emotion, but we don't have to react to it. You know, even if it's a negative emotion, if you're angry, yeah, okay, cool, you're angry. Be with it, you know. But also in that, we've never been taught how to deal with anger in a healthy way. That's why we feel, well, I'm not going to feel angry because I'll just suppress it. Something that's going to make me feel or distract me from anger is food. So finding ways to deal with your emotions healthily. Also creating space in your life. You know, we've all recovering from, you know, being out of lockdown and back into post-COVID life. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing again is people just piling on more responsibilities, more commitments, with no time to rest and digest and just let our nervous system heal a little bit, because obviously our nervous system generates stress, and stress eating is also part of the emotional eating side of things. So that's going to be super helpful. What I recommend, as I said, most of my clients, what I get them to do is actually track their food and also just their mood. And I'm not talking about tracking calories. We actually need to get away from calorie counting, because mostly it's like, there's a lot of inaccuracies with calorie counting, but also it gives us that misconception and builds on the fears of food. But if you just generally wrote down, and this is what I've kind of wrote and published a little food and mood journal, where you just write down what you ate and how that made you feel, or what your mood was, and then just notice if maybe, okay, yeah, all right, at 3 o'clock in the afternoons, I do have a sweet tooth. Why is that there? Okay, I was completely distracted while I ate my lunch. I wasn't even there while eating my lunch. No wonder my body is needing more energy, or whatever the case is. Or, oh, gosh, I'm actually so tired. No wonder I'm craving more sugar in the mornings. You can pick up so much if we actually just become more aware of how we feel and how food affects us.
Fantastic tips there, Stel. I really appreciate you sharing those wonderful tips with the listeners. And how can the listeners best connect with you?
Yes, beautiful. So I also have a podcast called Beyond Overeating by Wholesome Lifestyle Project. So that's probably, especially if they want to know more about the food zombie brain I talk about, or just general tips on body acceptance and binge eating, you're welcome to pop on there. I also have a website, wholesomelifestyleproject.com. They're welcome to even just, there's a little chat function there, pop me a message and I can support them in any way they like. Or Instagram, also the handle Wholesome Lifestyle Project on Instagram.
And all those links that Stel's just shared with you, I'll include in the show notes. So you can go directly to the show notes and click on those links follow Stel. She's a guru in this space, so can really help you along in your journey to recovering and being healthier and having a more healthier mindset about you and around food and the relationship with food. So really appreciate you coming on the show, Stel. It's been wonderful chatting with you, and thanks for sharing all those tips with the listeners.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony. This was a great chat.
And to the listeners, if you like the episode or you know someone out there that struggles with their relationship with food, please share it with them. The more people we can create awareness around disordered eating or poor relationships with food, the better they can have access to people that can help them, such as Stel. So please, share the episode with others that you know that may be struggling with their relationship with food or their relationship with their body. And this episode would benefit them in terms of connecting with Stel and developing that relationship on how they can move forward without having all those negative emotions associated with why they are binge eating or why they are uncomfortable in their own body. So thank you, listeners, and stay tuned for more insightful episodes of Me and My Health Up.